Okay, so this is the last chapter of Alice Adventures in Wonderland, chapter 12, Alice's Evidence. Here, cried Alice, quiet, forgetting in the flurry of the moment how large she had grown in the last few minutes, and she jumped up in such a hurry that she tipped over the jury box to the edge of the skirt, of upsetting all the jurymen onto the heads of the crowd below, and there they lay sprawling about, reminding her very much of a globe of goldfish she had accidentally upset the week before. Oh, I beg your pardon, she exclaimed in a tone of great dismay, and began picking them up again as quickly as she could. But for the accident of the goldfish kept running in her head, and she had a vague sort of idea that they must be collected at once and put back into the jury box, or they would die. The trial cannot proceed, said the king in a very grave voice, until all the jurymen are back in their proper places. All he repeated with a great emphasis, looking hard at Alice as he said so. Alice looked at the jury box and saw that in her haste, she had put the lizard in her downwards, and the poor little thing was waving its tail about in a melancholy way, being quiet, unable to move. She soon got it out again and put it right. Not that it signifies much, she said to herself. I should think it would be quiet as much use in the trial one way up as the other. As soon as the jury had a little recovered from the shock of being upset, and their slates and pencils had been found and handed back to them, they set to work very diligently to write out a history of the accident, all except the lizard, who seemed too much overcome to do anything but sit with its mouth open, gazing up into the roof of the car. What do you know about this business? The king said to Alice. Nothing, said Alice. Nothing whatever, persisted the king. Nothing whatever, said Alice. That's very important, the king said, turning to the jury. They were just beginning to write his down on their slates, but when the white rabbit interrupted, unimportant, your majesty, means of course, he said in a very respectful tone, but frowning and making faces at him as he spoke. Unimportant, of course, I meant, the king hastily said, and went on to himself in an undertone, important, unimportant, 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 as if he were trying to which word sounded best. Some of the jury wrote it out important and some unimportant. Alice could see this as he was near enough to look over their sleds, but it doesn't matter a bit, she thought to herself. At this time, at this moment, the king, who had been for some time busily writing in his notebook, called out silence and read out from his books. Rule 42. All person more than a mile high to leave the car. Everybody look at Alice. I am not a mile high, said Alice. You are, said the king. Nearly 2 miles high, added the queen. Well, I shan't go at any rate, said Alice. Besides, there's no regular rule. You invented it just now. It's the oldest rule in the book, said the king. Then it ought be to be number one, said Alice. The king turned pale and shut his notebook hastily. Consider your verdict, he said to the jury in a low, trembling voice. There's more evidence to come yet, please, your majesty, said the white rabbit, jumping up in great hurry. This paper has just been picked up. What's a net? Said the queen. I haven't opened it yet, said the white rabbit, but it seems to be a letter written by President to somebody. It must have been that, said the king, unless it was written to nobody, which isn't as usual. Oh, who is it directed to? Said one of the jurymen. It isn't directed at all, said the white rabbit. In fact, there's nothing written on the outside. He unfolded the paper as he spoke and added, it isn't a letter after all, it's a set of verses. Are they in the prisoner handwriting? Said another of the jurymen. No, they're not, said the white rabbit, and that's the queerest thing about it. The jury all looked puzzled. He must have imitated somebody else's hand, said the king. The jury all brightened again. Please, your majesty, said the knave. I didn't write it, and they can prove I did. And there's no name sign at the end. If you didn't sign it, said the king, that only makes the matter worse. You must have meant some mischief, or else you have signed your name like an honest man. There was a general clapping of hands at this. It was the first really clever thing the king had said that day. That proves his gold, said the queen. It proves nothing of the sort, said Alice. Why, you don't even know what they are about. Read them, said the king. The white rabbit put his spectacles. Where shall I begin, please, your majesty? Begin at the beginning. The king said gravely, and go until you come to the end, then stop. They were the first, the white rabbit read. They told me you had been to her and mentioned me to him, as he gave me a good character but said I could not swim. He sent them word I had not convey know it to be true if she could push the matter on what would become of you. I gave her one, they gave him two, you gave us three or more, they are returned from him to you. Though they were mine before. If I or she could change to be involved in this affair, he trusted you to set them free, exactly as we were. My notion was that you had been before she had this fit, and an obstacle that come between him and our servant. Don't let him know she liked them best, for this must ever be a secret kept for the rest between yourself and me. That's the most important piece of evidence we've had here, said the king, rubbing his hands. So now let the jury, if any one of them can explain it, said Alice. He had grown so large in the last few minutes and that she wasn't a bit afraid of interrupting him. I'll give him 6 pence. I don't believe there's an atom of meaning in it. The jury all wrote down on their slates he doesn't believe there's an atom of meaning in it, but none of them attempted to explain the paper. If there's no meaning in it, said the king, that saves a world of trouble, as we needn't try to find any. And yet I don't know. And he went on, spreading out of the verses on his knee and looking at them with one eye. I seem to see some meaning in them after all, said I could not swim. So you can swim, can you? He added, turning to the knave. The knave shook his head sadly. Do I look like it? He said, which he certainly did not, being made entirely of a cardboard. All right, so first, said the king, and he went on muttering over the verses to himself. We know it to be true that the jury, of course, I gave her one, they gave him two. Why, that must be what he did with the tarts, but it goes on. They all returned from him to you, said Alice. Why? There they are, said the king triumphantly, pointing to the tarts on the table. Nothing can be clearer than that. Then again, before she had this fit, you never had fits, my dear, I think, he said to the queen. Never, said the queen furiously, throwing an inkstand at the lizard as she spoke, and the unfortunate little Bill had left off writing on his lap with one finger as he found it made no mark, but he now hastily began again, using the ink, what was trickling down his face as long as it lasted. Then the words don't fit you, said the king. Looking around the court with a smile, there was a dead silence. It's a pun, the king added is in an angry tone, and everybody laughed. Let the jury consider their verdict, the king said. For about the 20th time that die? No, said the queen. Sentence first, verdict afterwards. Stuff and nonsense, said Alice loudly. The idea of having the sentence first. Hold your tongue, said the queen, turning purple. I won, said Alice, off with her head. The queen shouted at the top of her voice. Nobody moved. Who cares for you? Said Alice. She had grown to her full size by this time. You are nothing but a pack of cards. At this, the whole pack rose up into the air and came flying upon her. She gave a little scream, half fright and half anger, and tried to beat them off, and found herself lying on the bank with her head in the lap of sister, who was gently brushing away some dead leaves that had fluttered down from the trees upon her face. Wake up, Alice, dear, said her sister. Why, what long sleep you've had? Oh, I've had such a curious dream, said Alice, and she told her sister as well as she could remember then all these strange adventures of hers that you have just been reading about. And when she had finished, her sister kissed her and said it was a curious dream, dear, certainly. But now run into your tea. It's getting late. So Alice got up and ran off, thinking while she ran as well she might, what a wonderful dream it had been. But her sister sat still just as she left her, leaning her head on her hand, Watching the setting sun and thinking of little Alice and all her wonderful adventures, still she too began dreaming after the fashion, and this was her dream. First, she dreamed of little Alice herself. Once again, the teeny hands were clasped upon her knee, and the bright, eager eyes were looking up into hers. Could hear the very tones of her voice and see that quiet little toss of her head to keep back the wandering hair that would always get into her eyes. And still, as she listened, or seemed to listen, the whole place around her became alive with the strange creature of her little sister dream. The long grass rustled at her feet as the white rabbit hurried by the frightened mouse placed his way through the neighboring pool. She could hear the rattle of the teacups as the mouse had his friend shared their ending the never-ending meal, and the shrill voice of the queen ordering of her unfortunate guest to execution. Once more, the big baby was sneezing on the Duchess's knee, while present dishes crashed around it. Once more, the shriek of the griffin, the squeezing of the lizard's lead pencil, and the choking of the surprised junior pigs filled the air, mixed up with the distant sobs of the miserable mock turtle. So she stayed on with closed eyes and I believed herself in Wonderland though she knew she had but to open them again and all would chance to dull reality because would be only rustling in wind and the pool rippling to the waving of the rays, the rattling the cups would change the tickling sip spells and the queen's shrill cries to the voice of the Sir Boy and the sneeze of the baby, the shriek of the griffin, and all the other queering noises would change to the confused glamour of the busy farmyard, while the lowing of the cattle in the distance would take the place of the more total heavy sobs. Leslie pictured to herself how his shameless sister of hers would, in the after time, be herself a grown woman and how she would keep through all her reaper years, simple and loving herself of her childhood, and how she would gather about her other little children and make their eyes bright and eager with many a strange tale, perhaps even with a dream of Wonderland a long ago, and how she would feel with all their simple sorrow and find a pleasure in all their simple joy, remembering her own child life and the happy summer day. So that's the end of the Alice Wonderland novel that I'm reading for you. So for the last minute, I would explain to you the summary of this chapter. So in the meantime, Alice has grown up so much that she upsets the jewelry box when she gets up. She hastily tries to put them back into their places. She tells the king that she knows nothing to the stolen star, but which he considered very important. Then the king reads from his notebook stating that all persons more than a mile high must leave the court. Alice refuses to leave because she suspects that he made up the rule, and the king tells the jury to consider their verdict. Then the white rabbit brings in a letter which serves as evidence that the contents of verse written in somebody else's handwriting, which clears up nothing at all. However, the king thinks that it is important, but Alice correct him and explain why the first proves nothing. Eventually, the king asks the jury for the third time to consider the verdict, and now the queen contradicts him and says that there should be a sentence first and verdict afterwards. And Alice isn't afraid to contradict her anymore, as she has grown to her full size now and tells them that they're nothing but a pack of cards. At this point, the whole pack rises up into the air and comes flying down upon her. She tries to beat them off, but finds herself lying on the bank with her head in the lap of the sister, who is brushing away some dead leaves that fell down from the trees upon her face. Alice realizes that everything was a dream and tells her adventure to her sister as Alice runs off for the tea. Her sister thinks about the dream and falls asleep herself and dreams the same dream as Alice. And she continues to dream about how her little sister will eventually become herself a grown woman and how she will always keep the simple and loving heart of her childhood. So that's the end of my presentation about Alice Adventures in Wonderland novel. Hope you enjoy it and Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.